reason together, that's what God says. Come now, let us reason together, says the Lord.
Welcome back, everybody. Let's open with prayer. Heavenly Father, we thank you for your watch care over us. We thank you, Lord, for the food you have provided for our needs, the fellowship that we've had, and the sights and sound of nature. As we bow before you, we recognise that you are our Lord and Saviour, and that we are in need of salvation. Be with us and bless us in this study hour, so that we might have a clearer revelation of your will for us, individually and as a corporate body. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. So I want to begin by asking us a question, and it's about the construction of a human being. So here's a person, and this body, is this us? Is this you? Feel free to answer. If you don't answer, I'll ask someone specifically. Then you'll be put into a tight spot. Is that right? I'm looking at you.
What do you mean exactly? Is it me?
Is that what you are? Yes? Anyone else?
I want to say no.
You want to say no? So you're going to say no?
I'm saying no.
Okay.
Can I?
You tell me why. He said yes and you said no.
Right. You want to explain, Terry, or I'll give you a chance first.
No, thank you.
Oh. Well, I have a head. I have both my arms, thankfully, and I have body and feet and legs and feet.
It's just a picture
Oh. Yeah.
or a drawing.
Sorry, you're saying it's a...
That's just a picture, a drawing on the board. It's not you.
Okay,
No, it represents.
but give me some license.
Yeah. Good. But what I'm trying to say is no, it's not me, because like this body will die, will be changed. Like I'm a soul, and I have a body that God gave to me.
We just started. Sorry. You're fine. Sit on that second row
So-
again. I don't think Charlotte
So
might come
no, my
or the third.
body isn't me.
Anyone else? Sister Wendy.
I don't think this has to be difficult. So yes, we're people. Yes, I'm a person.
That's what I thought. If it's a person. I mean, it's a person, but
That looks like a girl.
yeah.
The Bible says we're many members, but all one body.
So let me read this from Healthful Living 13.5. We have special duties resting upon us. We should be acquainted with our physical structure and the laws controlling natural life. While Greek and Latin, which are seldom of any advantage, are made a study by many, physiology and hygiene are barely touched upon. The study to which to give thought is that which concerns natural life, a knowledge of oneself. It is the house in which we live that we need to preserve, that we may do honour to God, who has redeemed us. So in this context, is this body us?
No, it's the house that we live in.
Do you agree with that? So, if this person got her arm chopped off, you went into an accident, would this arm be her?
Yes, it's a part of her.
So it would just
Not anymore.
So
It
not
was.
anymore. So is she less of a person because she has lost an arm? You think less of a person? Does she still think the same?
Well, yeah.
Have all the same thoughts and feelings? Yeah, I would suggest that the arm is not her. And if she lost her legs or if she became paraplegic, she'd still be the same person. She might not be able to do the same things, but she would still be the same person. So, God forbid, if she had her head chopped off, would this be the person? 90% of her before, would that be the person? Would that be her? Just lying there? Or would that be her?
The head.
The head would be. Now, I'm pretty sure that they've got the technology now, because they've done these experiments with mice. I don't know if they can do it with humans yet. That if you took the head off an animal and you just put the right pipes and connected it all up, that head would function perfectly well. If you put all the nutrients back in there, because all the head really needs, all your brain really needs is, what does it need? It needs sugar, some oxygen, water, a few minerals and chemicals, and it will function reasonably well. So if you chop the head of a mouse and it didn't have a body, it would still be the same mouse. It would still think the same, have the same emotions, the same feelings, everything would still be the same. But the body itself wouldn't be the mouse anymore. So what I want to suggest is that our physical being, the shell that we have, isn't us. We're a spiritual being that lives in a physical matrix. Now, I'm not trying to say that a human being isn't a combination of the spiritual and the physical, because we know that. The Bible talks about becoming a living soul. But if this, and the reason why this is reasonably important to understand is because these arguments have been around, these philosophical arguments have been around for a long time. I mean, for millennia, the Greeks used to study this. And in the time of Ellen White, one of the arguments that they were having was that because this human shell is us, when we die and we dissolve away, or we get eaten by a shark, or whatever happens to us, when we get resurrected, so here the person is resurrected, she's going to look the same basically, maybe, with some glory around her. So if this body was part of her, what would need to happen The argument went like this: if all of this is the person, then the very atoms and molecules that made her what she was then all have to be gathered together to make her what she is there. And Ellen White says, what did Ellen White say to that? No, she didn't say it this way, but she's like, that's craziness. You know, that's utter foolishness. And part of the reason why it's foolishness is because the shell or the body isn't really the person. What makes up the person is this non-physical entity, which I don't even know what to call it, but we'll just call it us. Because God is spirit, and so are we. We're spiritual beings in a physical entity or shell or a house. So I want us to sort of think about that a little bit. So if this shell or body isn't us, what is us? What are we? What are we composed of? So I want to read a statement. And this is taken from the Review and Herald, January the 10th, 1882. Paragraph 1. I'm going to cut into the passage. It says, the nature of man is threefold, and the training enjoined by Solomon comprehends the right development of the physical, intellectual, and moral powers. So this tells us what? Man is threefold in nature. And what does she describe it here as? She says it's the physical, intellectual, and moral. Now I want to suggest that when she says physical, she doesn't mean the shell. She's not talking about the shell. She's talking about something else. So let me find that. If you have any questions, please ask. We'll take this from Adventist Home, 127.2. This is an interesting passage. I like this one. I've just said that the nature of man is threefold. 1, 2, 3. And it says here, the lower passions have their seat in the body and work through it. The words flesh or fleshly or carnal lusts. Where are those three terms used? Flesh, fleshly or carnal lusts. Do we know where? I mean, they're obviously in the Bible. Do we know where? I don't mean the specific book, but generally. Who uses those phrases?
Paul does.
Paul. So she's speaking about Paul in his epistles. He comes over this term over and over again. The flesh, fleshly or carnal lust. She's going to say this. The words flesh, fleshly or carnal lust embrace the lower corrupt nature. The flesh of itself cannot act contrary to the will of God. We are commanded to crucify the flesh with the affections and lusts. How shall we do it? Shall we inflict pain on the body? No, but put to death the temptation to sin. The corrupt thought is to be expelled. Every thought is to be brought into captivity to Jesus Christ. All animal propensities are to be subjected to the higher powers of the soul. The love of God must reign supreme. Christ must occupy an undivided throne. Our bodies are to be regarded as his purchased possession. The members of the body are to become the instruments of righteousness. So she speaks about many things that Paul brings up. When she says the members of the body, that's the term that Paul uses. when she speaks about flesh or fleshly or carnal lust, it's the phrase that Paul uses often. So there's many things in there, and I know it's hard to do it without having the words in front of you, but I just want to pick up two things. She talks about the lower passions, and then halfway into the paragraph she says, all animal propensities are to be subjected to the higher powers. So we read in one statement, man is threefold in nature, and now from Adventist Home, she's going to talk about the higher powers and the lower powers. Or I'll put it as she says it. She says it in different ways, but in this passage, she talks about the lower passions and higher powers. And I want us to pick up one thing. The lower passions have their seat in the body. And what is a seat? It's not, don't just say a chair. Sorry?
Start.
A start?
Throne.
A throne? Anyone else?
A driver's seat.
So I'd go with both of those concepts. A driver's seat, where you're in charge, which is what a throne symbolises, someone who's in charge. So if it says the lower passions have their seat in the body, here's the body and here's the seat. And so what has its seat in the body? Did we just read? The lower passions. So I'll put LP here. So the lower passions have their seat in the body. And as you say, I think this seat here is a symbol of a throne or rulership. Does that make sense? So she says that there's two things. There's a higher power and the lower passions, or higher and lower powers. She says it differently in different places. And the lower passions, they have their seat or their throne in the body. So what would that mean if the lower powers have their throne or their seat, as she says it, in the body? How would you conceptualize what that means?
It means the body is directing what you're doing.
Who's ruling whom? It says the lower powers has its seat in the body.
Oh.
So it's not the body that's directing,
Okay.
it's the lower passions that are directing, aren't they? Yeah, because they're in charge. So
Or
self, sinfulness. Okay, so you're picking up this stuff about lower and higher. Does lower have some negativity towards associated with it, and higher has some positiveness? I guess that's what you're picking up with higher and lower. And if we could imagine this, I don't know if you've seen movies or something where you have robots and you have these little men inside these big things, and they pull all these cables and they can get these things to do what they want. Just like a car even. You know, these cars are really powerful, and you sit there and you press this little metal pedal at the bottom and you drive a steering wheel and you can move a huge truck without any force or any power. Yeah, because we have power assisted steering and all that. So what this lower power is doing is controlling the body. Yeah? So the lower power says, I want food. So what would happen? What would it tell the arm to do?
Make some food.
Yeah, so your arm, pick up this. What would it be?
You tell us.
Would it be an apple? Or would it be a cheesecake or cream cake or a donut? It's the lower passions, remember? What do you think lower passions would like? Something we shouldn't eat.
A
Yeah?
donut.
A donut. So the lower passion says, oh, I fancy a donut today. So hand, pick up the donut and put it to your mouth and begin eating so I can be satisfied. Yeah? So the body is just doing what it's told by the lower powers or lower passions. because it's in charge. It has its seat. Yeah? You've heard a statement that says something like, if it tastes good, eat it. If it tastes good, feel good, smell good, yeah? You can do all of these things. So this lower power is going to have access to the outside world through this body. So men have got a big problem in this. They like looking at women. So it's really the lower power that likes doing all of this. So it tells your eyes to direct your focus in a place that it shouldn't. And it will say, oh, have a look at that. Are the eyes bad? So if you took the eyes out and you put them on the table, they wouldn't do much, would they? In fact, if you got someone else's eyes and put them in, some righteous person's eyes, yeah? Somebody died and there was a righteous person, godly saint. What would those eyes be doing? They'd still be doing the same bad thing, wouldn't they? Yeah? Because it's not the body that's the problem. It's these lower passions that are the problem, yeah? Because they're controlling the body. So Paul has a good understanding of this, but we misunderstand Paul when he talks about the flesh, or fleshly, or carnal. He's not talking about the outside body, because these fingers, they don't like donuts. In fact, they don't like anything. They don't know anything. They just don't think. They're just fingers. They just do what they're told. Yeah? So, I could chop this hand off and put an artificial hand on, which definitely doesn't think, and it would do exactly the same thing, wouldn't it? It would pick up the donut and eat. It would just follow the commands. So I want us to conceptualize that, which is why I'm saying the outside shell of the body is not us. Yeah? What we are is something that's inside. And it's threefold, and it's also at two levels, the higher and lower powers. So when Ellen White says it's the physical, intellectual and moral, the physical bit is she's referring to these lower passions, because who controls the physical that we just read? The lower passions have their seat or their throne in the body. So I want us to remember that. And then she says, the words flesh, fleshly or carnal lust embrace the lower corrupt nature. So this is where we picked up that the lower was bad, because she says it right here. She says lower passions, and it says the corrupt nature. So this is corrupt. So name some things that are corrupt. Remember, they're not physical. I can't say eating a donut is corrupt. Stealing. Stealing is something that you would do. So I want to go a bit higher than stealing. Why do we steal?
Jealousy.
Covetousness. Is it E-R-T? E-T? No, I didn't think it. Yeah. And you said jealousy.
The wrong kind.
So is covetousness bad or good?
It can be bad or good.
So it can be bad or good. What about jealousy? Same, yeah? Because what kind of a God do we serve? A loving God or a jealous God? Both. If you go to Exodus 20, he says, I'm a jealous God. Because jealousy is a good thing. Yeah? It controls so many things in our world in a positive way. So these lower passions, even though they may be corrupt, they're not necessarily in and of themselves bad. That's what I want us to pick up. But they've become corrupted. So I want to suggest that these lower passions are things like we'll put jealousy, passion, appetite, lust. Is lust good or bad?
Oh, it can be good or bad.
Where did lust even come from? You know, when mankind, when we lust, where did all this lusting come from?
supposedly after the fall.
So we weren't lusting before that?
No record of it that I know of in the
So
Bible.
how do you define what lust is?
In the context of the Bible, it's always in a bad
Yeah. So would you say,
connotation.
when we were getting ready for lunch and you saw all that food on the table, would you say that you were interested in it or lusting after it?
It's an interesting.
I was lusting after it. It was really good.
And it's what you say, because the Bible, after a few chapters of Genesis, it's all of that is just negative, talking about the lost condition of a human being. It seems like lust is in and of itself something that's bad. But here's this woman, and she's got lust inside her. Where did that lust come from? So here's lust floating around here. Did it sort of just, after the fall, suddenly sort of float around and somehow get into her? No? I don't think so. Where did that lust come from then?
Satan.
So he said, open your mouth, let's have some lust, and put it in. Okay, that's fine. Where did Satan get it from then? If Satan gave it to you, that's a reasonable proposition. Where did he get it from? Because he used to live in heaven, so he went to a bookshop. He says, let me get some lust, put it in my pocket while they're not looking, come to earth and give it to Adam. No, you can see that won't work. Sorry?
His jealousy of God.
Yeah, but where did this emotion come from?
From the Creator.
From the Creator. So God creates lust. Are we okay with that?
Yes, yes.
Yeah? When God created Lucifer, what did he create him in? Not where? In his
Image.
In his image. So God created Lucifer in his image. And so if Lucifer had some lust somewhere in him, what does it tell you about God?
God has lust.
He must have had lust in him as well. And jealousy, where did you get jealousy from? Again, it wasn't Satan, something that Satan gave you, because then I'm going to ask, well, where did Satan get it from? And he lives in heaven and there's no bad corners anywhere. So he must have got it from the same place we got it, which is from God. So when God creates something, he creates copies of himself, doesn't he? Yeah. Everything in this universe is a copy of God at some level. Because God is so big, he can be multifaceted. So is this a copy of God or in the image of God? Would we say that?
Yeah.
Yeah? Or is this my version of a moon? Is that created in the image of God? Because the heavens declare his glory.
Okay, so maybe this is silly, but I just happen to think about something. If we're a copy of God and we get all these emotions and everything from heaven, say, God doesn't hate, he hates, abhors things, so, humans hate each other sometimes, and they hate things, but do we get that from him, too?
I think there's a number of verses that tell you God hates things. So the emotion of hate, let's put that here, the emotion of hatred came from God. Because there's things that God hates. He tells us in a number of different places. What I want us to see by this is not that God is corrupt, but I also want to show that none of these are inherently corrupt. They can become corrupted, they're corruptible, but they're not corrupt in and of themselves. So a moon, is that a good reflection of God? Is that it's not brilliant, I don't think. You can't talk to the moon. You can't have a relationship with it. It can reflect his glory, but it's not, it's just a lump of rock. So even though it's reflection of him, it's not a good image of God, in one sense, compared to a dog. If you compare the dog to the moon, which is a better reflection of God, I would suggest the dog is. Yeah? God looks nothing like a dog, but a dog has many attributes that God has compared to the moon. The moon doesn't have many attributes of God. Okay?
Where did God get lost?
Where did he get it from? He didn't get it from anywhere. It's inherent in him. It's what he is. So wherever God is, he didn't come from anywhere. He has always been. He's outside of time and space. This is what he is. And everything that he creates has some kind of reflection of him. So a moon doesn't have any appetite, does it? No, so it's only a limited representation of who God is. Has a flower got an appetite? It certainly has. It's got an appetite for sunlight, for nutrients, for water. But again, it's not a good representation of him. Is the flower jealous? No. So it reflects God's glory in a limited way. And so as he's created all these things in the universe, some are a better reflection of him or of his image, and some are not so good, if I can put it that way. Angels were the number one creation for a long time. And then came humanity, human beings. And they were even a more perfect reflection of God's character, or they were created in his image. Okay, so hopefully we've dealt with all of these things. If we can conceptualize that they're not out here, they're already in us and they're part of God. It's who we are. I just want to pick up a few more things from this paragraph before we start making a bit of application. So embrace the lower corrupt nature. So this is being corrupted. That's what I want us to see here. The flesh of itself cannot act contrary to the will of God. What does that mean? Because it says the lower passions are called, what's another name that Paul uses for them?
Fleshly.
Flesh. So I'm going to call it flesh. And what I want us to remember is the finger flesh in this context?
No.
No, this is not what Paul means when he says flesh. When he says flesh, he means the lower passions. He doesn't mean your bodily parts. It doesn't mean your feet or your legs when he says the flesh. So I want us to remember that. The flesh of itself cannot act contrary to the will of God. So I want us to think about that. Now, man is threefold in nature, got the physical, intellectual and moral, but there's the higher power and the lower power. So it says that the flesh, and I'm going to call it the lower passions, I'm going to call it power, because I just remember it that way. The lower powers, what can they not do? They cannot act contrary to the will of God. So, we'll be careful here, don't want to offend anybody. Is it contrary to the will of God that we eat donuts? I'll do another one because people might argue that one. Cheese. Cheese. Are we okay with cheese, a safe one? Or pork? Pork is definitely safe. I always speak to different groups and people have different viewpoints and things. Is it contrary to the will of God that we eat pork? Okay. So it says here, the flesh of itself cannot act contrary to the will of God. So here's pork. And my lower passions say, I love bacon. I like the smell, the taste, it's all good. So I'm going to tell my hand to pick up the bacon and start eating. Yeah? Is that contrary to the will of God to eat? Yeah? It's contrary to the will of God. It says the flesh, the lower passions, this LP right here, it can't get my arm to pick up the bacon and eat it. It says it cannot act contrary to the will of God. Can we see that? Yeah. Do we see that that's what it means? Yeah. So my lower passions cannot tell this arm exactly what to do, even though they have the throne seated right here in the body. Okay? So the lower passions, jealousy, passion, appetite, lust, hatred, and can we put anger? All of these things cannot tell your body what to do. So if your lower passions here get riled up because you're having a bad day, Can they tell your mouth to open and start shouting and being rude? Because if you shout and be rude, is it contrary to the will of God? Yeah, it's contrary to the will of God. And it says the flesh cannot act contrary to the will of God. It cannot do that. It cannot make your mouth say bad things. So why does your mouth say bad things? Who made your mouth, or who wanted your mouth to say bad things? It was this, because it's angry, it's irritated now, and it wants your mouth to open and say something bad. In the UK we call it venting, when you want to let off some steam. Do you have a similar kind of concept here? I don't know if you call it venting. We want to get revenge even, yeah? But it doesn't have enough power to do that. So the lower passions, even though they have their seat in the body, they can't make the body do anything that's contrary to the will of God. So who's going to do that? Who's going to do that? Now remember it says physical, intellectual and moral. So I want to suggest, I'm going to swap this a little bit around. And this is flesh. I'm going to say this is the physical. And we had, what else did we have? We had intellectual and moral. And what I want to suggest is that the nature of man is threefold, but it's in two sections. Higher powers and lower powers. The lower powers control or have their seat in the body, in the physical. And they're things like all these emotions, good or bad. Happiness is right here. Joy. They don't have to have a negative connotation to them. Laughter, all of these things, all of these emotions. So I want to call these emotions. These are all have their seat in the body. And how are they all stimulated? Through our five senses. Yeah? So if the sun hits your body, what does it make you feel? It makes you feel good. If it's not too hot, if it's nice, yeah? When it's too cold, it makes you feel horrible perhaps. Or if it's dark and grey outside, it makes you feel miserable. So this is what it means when it has its seat in the body. It has an interaction with the outside world through our senses. And now we have these higher powers. And the higher powers are in two sections, intellectual and moral. So I want us to think a little bit about the intellectual. So what kind of things would be intellectual? What about reason? If you reason from cause to effect. Or memory. Intelligence. I've got memory. Understanding, which is very similar to reasoning. Logic. Facts. Figures. All of these things are all to do with the higher powers. Another way to describe the higher powers, Ellen White talks about it with this other term, is mind. So we've got the mind and we've got the flesh. We're going to read in a moment, there's another term that's used to cover all of this, and it's the heart. Okay? So I'm going to put heart here. So we've got mind and heart. Mind and heart. And there's one more, this moral one. And I'm going to give another name for this moral, and it's will. We'll speak about will in a moment. He speaks about will here, it talks about the will of God. So do we all have a will? Yeah? Where did we get it from?
God. We got it from God.
From God, yeah. Because God has a will, so therefore we have a will. So let me ask you a question. What is will? What is the will?
Doing things.
Doing things. Okay? So I'm going to say maybe the ability to make decisions or choices. So, are we always making choices? Yeah? All the time. You can't abstain from something, because when you abstain, it's a choice. You choose to abstain. Yeah? Our whole lives are governed by choices or the will. We read here, the corrupt nature, the lower powers, the flesh, cannot of itself act contrary to the will of God. So here we are, my lower passions are saying, I want to eat bacon, but they can't make my arm do something. What do they have to do? They have to go to the will, because the will is the power to do what? And so I'm going to make a choice. What am I going to choose? I'm going to say, arm, pick up the bacon, or arm, leave it. They're my two choices. Okay? And I'm going to say that the will is the one that makes the decision. It's going to tell my arm what to do. Yeah? Can we conceptualize that? The lower power here is saying, I want bacon. I want it. It tastes nice. I want it. So it's going to go to the will and say, go on, do it. It's okay. And our wills are so weak, they say, oh, go on then. That's how we eat. Or they get bullied. Yeah? We all know about bullying. So this lower passion, these lower powers, have become so strong, but they're not really strong. They bully the will into doing what they want. Yeah? Threefold nature. 1, 2, and what's the third one? Mind. I'll call it higher power, although this is a higher power as well, and this is the mind. And what have we all read in the Bible about pork eating? It's bad. Yeah? Go into science and they'll tell you how bad it is. So, this power is saying, you know what I fancy? I'm hungry. My body's craving for some food. It needs some energy because it's working in the body. It has its seat there so it knows what's happening. It's got its finger on the pulse of all of our bodily needs. And our body's saying it's time to refuel. And the lower powers say, you know, I'd really like something salty and fatty. And your mind saying, you know that's not good. You know what you read? It's going to fill your arteries with cholesterol. It's really bad for you. And this is now going to have to make a choice, isn't it? Who's the will going to listen to? This one or this one? Probably the lower. So you've been there before. Yeah. We are commanded to crucify the flesh. What does it mean to crucify the flesh? Does it mean to cut your fingers off so they can't pick up bad food again? What is the flesh? It's these ones here. They need to be crucified. They need to be hung and nailed to a cross so they don't cause us any more problems. Yeah? Can we do that?
Yes.
Yeah? The problem is, when you crucify it and nail it to a cross, it has a bad habit of what? Resurrecting and coming back. Doesn't it? I mean, we've all experienced it. Yeah? You can sort out all of this power, maybe for a moment, maybe a day, maybe for a week. You know, it's first day of the first month, January the 1st, and all these resolutions come in. And within a week, what happens? It's back to the old self. Yeah, back to our old ways. We are commanded to crucify the flesh with the affections and lusts. So we've got lust here, and we can put affections. All of these things need to be crucified. How shall we do this? How are we going to crucify all of this? Shall we inflict pain on the body? Should we go on a starvation diet? Yeah, because many of us do, even many Adventists. We get into problems when it comes to taking care of our bodies. We don't know how to take care of our bodies. It's not, the problem isn't the mind. Most Adventists know how to eat. They get sick. We get sick. I should say they. We get sick. Why? Because we're run by this thing here. That's what our big problem is. So what's the solution? We need to fast. We need to just drink lemon water for 2 weeks. Get fully cured. Yeah, we'd get cured if we did that. If we went on a water fast for a month, all of our problems would all disappear. Because what we've done, we've inflicted pain upon the body. What's going to happen after the month? Just going to go back to the old ways. Yeah? We always just go back to the old ways. Like a dog to its vomit. Or a pig, a sow to its mire. Pig goes back to the mud. Dog goes back to its vomit. And that's what the problem is. We haven't learned about controlling ourselves. And the reason we haven't learned about controlling ourselves is because we don't understand the nature of man, that it's threefold and how it's constructed. And all of this is an intellectual exercise before we even begin to experience the benefits of what can be done in a human being, or by a human being. Shall we inflict pain on the body? No. But put to death the temptation to sin. Okay, so I ate this, was that sin? It was sin to eat that thing. Okay. Is it my arm's fault? Should I chop my arm off? Should I beat my arm up and say, don't ever do that again? Of course, it's craziness. But you know, we smile, but that's how most of us live. We live that way. And God doesn't want us to live that way, but most of us live wrecked lives. Because in so many subtle ways, that's what we do. You know, when I'm feeling bad, I'm going to blame my son. Because it wasn't my son that made me feel bad. Or my wife. Or my cousin. Or my brother. Or my church sister. Someone else is causing me all these problems. We always want to blame something else or someone else. Because what we want to do is we want to inflict pain on the body. So if you're feeling bad, you just shout at your wife. Inflict pain upon her body. Hurt her. And everything's going to be fine. And is it? For sure. It's fine for a few moments. Don't you feel good? You've released all of that tension. Yeah? You've let her know what's what. And you say, I've got peace now. But it doesn't endure, does it? Yeah?
No. Until she starts talking back.
Yeah, because she needs to inflict some bodily pain. Yeah? You know, if your child is giving you aggravation, the best thing to do is take your slipper off and beat it in anger.
No.
Isn't that what we do? I mean, isn't that what we do? And we feel good for a moment until we realise what we've done, and then we repent and we feel sorry, we try and apologise. And you know, if you hit a child hard enough, for long enough, sometimes it's only once, they'll never, ever forgive you for the rest of their lives. It only takes one episode of that, and you can ruin a child for life. They'll hate you for the rest of their lives. Some of these things have eternal consequences, and we don't realise it. So, this is not the way to behave. But we need to put to death the temptation to sin. Then she says this, the corrupt thought is to be expelled. These things that are happening here, they need to be expelled. And who's going to do the expelling? The will. The mind can't do anything. The mind just says, that's not good. Yeah? I don't think it's good to hit your child in anger. It's a bad move. But this is the one that's going to have to do the expelling. The corrupt thought is to be expelled. Every thought is to be brought into captivity to Jesus Christ. This is a nice bit. It says, all animal propensities are to be subjected to the higher powers. So, first she talks about the lower and the higher powers. And now she talks about animal propensities are meant to be subject to the higher powers. So here's the higher powers. So what's the animal propensities that she's just spoken about. She's just said the same thing but used a different phrase now. The lower passions here, now she's calling them animal propensity. What does propensity mean? It means a leaning or a bending towards something. Sorry?
Tendency.
A tendency. So we'll change it to tendency. The A-N-C-Y or E-N? So lower passions are animal tendencies. All animal tendencies, propensities, are to be subjected to the higher powers of the soul. The reason why it's nice to use this idea of animal propensities, because Ellen White uses animal propensities in a different context. And what does she say about animal propensities? How to make them strong. How do you strengthen animal propensities?
Eating flesh.
By eating animals. You eat animals, you'll strengthen the propensity to be like an animal. So what we know is that it's not just a matter of choice. Your will is not going to just say, I'm not going to eat this thing. Because if you've had it 100 times before, that animal that you've eaten has done what? It's strengthened the animal propensities or the lower passions. So this is why these lower passions have become so strong in the human being. They've become this bully. You know, when we're all at school, there's always a bully in the what do you call it, in the yard or the schoolyard. Call it schoolyard here, and everybody wants to avoid him or her because lots of times it's girls as well. It's not just a thing that's to do with boys. And if you keep on acquiescing to the bully, what happens to him or her? They just get stronger and stronger. It just takes somebody. I'm not advocating fighting or anything, of course, but it just takes somebody to hit them back just once and put them in. And sometimes they're not even the biggest person. They don't even have the biggest person. Someone just stands up to them and puts them in a place, and it all stops. So what we need to do is make sure we control all of these. And one of the mechanisms for that, because this is not a health lecture, but one of the mechanisms for it is through the reforms that the Lord has given us. Part of the reform work is to get this lower power and subjugate it and keep it dampened down. It's like a smouldering fire. You know, if you don't keep the water on it, it will just flare up one day. So we need to keep it dampened down. And the way we do that in this context is the one we just mentioned, is through diet control. Not just diet, but it's all the natural remedies that we have. So we need to keep these lower passions dampened down. And she calls them animal propensities. That's one of the reasons why we shouldn't be eating meat. That's just, as again, I'm not trying. It's not a health program, but it's all they're all connected subjects. Oh, sorry.
Well, that's okay. So if we eat meat, we're animals?
No, certainly not teaching us that, because if we were to believe that, we'd get into many erroneous doctrines. Because then we'd say that Jesus was an animal. So I'm not trying to teach that at all. What I am trying to teach is this. When God created this shell here, not us, not this spiritual being, but this shell, he knew, just like Ford knows, when it designs a car, what the best fuel for that car is. Yeah, the designers at Ford or GMC, all these companies, they know when they design these vehicles what the best fuel is for them, what the best oil is, because you have to use different oils for different cars. Yeah, it's not just the diesel and petrol or gas. It's also the type of oil that you use, different grades for different climates. So when God put this human body together, he knew what the best fuel was to make this body run effectively and efficiently. And if you go back to the original diet, you know meat wasn't part of that. For whatever reason, God has his reasons for doing it. And I say it's not a health lecture that I'm doing. But God gave us permission to eat meat. He had his reasons for doing that. And the Bible is clear in the book of Genesis. We have permission to do that. But unfortunately, the animal creation has got sick, just as we've got sick. Genetic mutations and all the problems with the animal creation. The whole of creation is waxing old and is groaning under the weight of sin. And it's got to a stage at the end of the world where animals are not really, I mean, they never were the best food to eat, but they're particularly harmful now. They're particularly damaging. And not only are animals particularly damaging, our human frame has degenerated over 6,000 years of sin.
Well, a lot of people believe that you can eat anything you want since Jesus died on the cross. I mean, everything is in the past. So the principle still stands, right?
Principle of?
What you were talking
Yes, yes. Many people think that since Jesus died, he nailed things to the cross, and one of the things he nailed to the cross was the differentiation between different types of food. And I think it's clear to see that that can't be the case. It's not logically consistent. I think my brother was saying, you know, since we no longer teach rhetoric or logic and reasoning in our education, people don't think straight often. You know, our human bodies are the same human bodies before the cross and after the cross. And if it was something bad before the cross, it's still going to be bad after the cross. So I'm not saying if we eat animals, we turn into animals, but what I am saying is that these emotions that we have are affected by what we eat. And there are certain chemicals or elements in flesh, in animals, that when we partake of them, they strengthen these things. Now, if all of this was just love, and we'd say we want some love to be strengthened, so we'd eat a lot of animals, but it's not that simplistic, because it's like a double-edged sword. Some of these things have got negative connotations about them, and it's these animal elements that we partake of if we eat flesh that begin to have this negativity about them, and we strengthen these lower powers in a way that is not helpful to us. So it's far easier, if you want to live a life that's not in conflict with yourself, to stay away from those types of food and eat a much cleaner diet, a cleaner fuel, if I can put it that way. All animal propensities are to be subjected to the higher powers of the soul. The love of God must rule supreme, must reign supreme. Christ must occupy an undivided throne. Okay, so where's the throne in our picture? That one there. And who's sitting on there? The lower passions. So the lower passions are the king, yes? Here's my crown. So let's get this picture here, make it a little bit bigger. So here's the lower passions. And they say, Jesus says, you know what? I want to sit on this throne. And the lower passions say, that's fine, we'll just snuggle up together. So it's moved back a bit and say, you can join us, Jesus. So here's Jesus on the throne. Is that a happy union? No, what did we just read? Christ must occupy an undivided throne. So what does Christ want to do? He wants to get this and say, you need to get off. Yeah?
So we can safely say this was the lesson he was trying to teach the Israelites in the wilderness when they indulged in eating the quail till they died.
Exactly that. He wants this to get off the throne, and he wants to take that place. And he says, this crown doesn't belong to you, it needs to be given to me. And once this happens, things start working properly like they're supposed to. Who's going to be making all the decisions?
Oh, the will.
The will still makes all the decisions. He still makes all the decisions because this is the thing that controls what you do or what you don't do. But now, if Christ is ruling here and the lower passions have been dethroned, does that mean they don't exist? Does that mean you don't have any passion anymore? That you suddenly don't like apples or bananas since when you become a Christian, you get baptized? Of course not. All of these things are still here. You still have hatred. Now you hate sin. You still have affections. We still love one another. All of these are still there. But now, when it talks about Jesus taking the throne, this seat, all the negative bits start being dealt with. Because now, all of these things are going to be putting in their correct place. Because where did they all come from originally? From God. They were all given to us by God. But through diet, I'm not saying that's a huge issue, but through Satan, all of these things have been corrupted. The lower passions have been corrupted. So what God's going to do is he's going to take this seat, the throne, and he's going to remove the corruption. He's going to remove the corrupt heart. He's going to remove the corrupt lower powers here. And this is the heart, where the heart, flesh, lower passions are all synonymous with one another. So, what kind of a heart do we have in this condition? We can say it's corrupt. A heart of stone. Earlier we read Isaiah 6. What did it say about the heart there? Make their heart fat. Is fat good for the heart? It certainly isn't. So all of these are synonymous terms that you've all read in the scriptures that are dealing with a corrupt heart. So when Jesus says, okay, I want you off the throne and I'm going to take your place here, does that mean you don't have a heart anymore? Doesn't mean that at all. What does it mean? It means the fat is cut away, the stone turns into flesh, and the corrupt turns into something that's pure. The Bible says the pure in heart. Where is purity to be found? Is it in the mind? Not in the mind, it's in the heart. So when we think about this heart or these lower passions, or the flesh, and Christ, we read here clearly, it says Christ must occupy an undivided throne. It's this throne that he wants to occupy. He wants to take the lower powers off. It doesn't mean you don't have all of these emotions anymore. What it means is that the corrupt, stony, fatty heart is going to get sorted out. The fat's going to be cut away, the stone is going to turn into a flesh, and the corrupt is going to become pure. Can we all conceptualize that? Okay. Now I want to ask you, any questions on that? That was just the introduction.